Hello, welcome back to the podcast slash YouTube channel. My name is Rennie. For those of you who are new, this is Surviving and Thriving, where I talk about mental health and healing. I'm someone who's diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder, and I'm just going to jump right in. Today, I want to talk about splitting. Splitting is something I've talked about before, and it's something I continue to struggle with as someone who has been diagnosed and experienced more of the petulant type of BPD, which is um, I've had very external, aggressive types of behaviors when I am in episodes, when I'm struggling with mental health episodes, which I have been a lot this year because there have been so many external stressors for me and triggers for me, and I'm continuing to work on this. But for those of you don't know what splitting is, maybe this is the first time you've ever heard of it. It's so the definition, the Google definition, is it's the psychological defense mechanism of seeing people or things as either all bad or all good without the ability to reconcile conflicting qualities. So you can't really see gray area. And a lot of times what happens is that this all or nothing thinking can cause you to either extremely romanticize and idealize someone or something or completely devalue or discard those people or things. And you can split on pretty much anything. I think people usually talk about splitting in the context of like romantic relationships, but you actually can do this for everything. I think I've split on like the most mundane things. This can go for jobs, this could go for schools, this can go for even mundane, like little things that you have. Like it really can go for everything. I've even split on myself. And so what this is usually rooted in, like a lot of the issues with BPD is trauma. Again, not always, but a lot of times this does stem from or is connected to an abandonment wound, which is something I struggle with. And I have an extreme rejection sensitivity. I have an extreme fear of rejection and abandonment. I know a lot of people struggle with this, and you hear a lot about people talking about anxious attachment styles, avoidant attachment styles. I think those terms get used really often. And so I think when I'm talking about cluster B disorders in particular, like BPD, I want to stress that these are more extreme cases of those things. Um, so when I mean like fear of abandonment, I mean like my splitting, my mental health episodes and the behaviors that stem from those fears are extreme. It's not as simple as like, oh, I have a fear of abandonment, and so I'm having like these arguments in my relationships, which that's part of it. But no, like this has caused me to historically self-harm or just have really violent outbursts in the past, um, and just not respect boundaries. I'm gonna be really honest about my behaviors in this episode because I feel like I haven't been as I don't want to say I haven't been as honest, but I think that I have left so much out, and I don't want to come across as someone who has it all figured out or as someone who hasn't experienced like the really, really dark sides of BPD because I am. I do struggle with the petulant type of BPD, and I was raised in a really violent home and environment. And so a lot of my behaviors are very fight. I also have the flight response, of course, but I have had historically a lot of the fight response whenever I was triggered or this fear of abandonment came up for me. And so for me, whenever I've had episodes where I was splitting, I used to be really violent. I used to, in some of my earlier relationships, when I was younger, especially, I would lash out on people. I would just say the worst possible things that I could think to say. Sometimes I would throw things. Sometimes I would break things. I would literally scream like a toddler. I'm not kidding. Like I would basically have a tantrum, a meltdown. Um, and throughout the years with recovery, obviously this has improved. I don't have like explosive violent outbursts when I'm splitting now like I used to when I was really young. I know like throughout my teenage years I struggled a lot with this and as a young adult in my early relationships, but I haven't struggled with the violent outbursts in a couple of years, but I still struggle with the boundaries and with what I say when I'm splitting. I have been historically someone that would harass people that I considered my favorite person or someone that I valued their opinion, and that rejection sensitivity, that fear of abandonment was really strong with the person. So whether that was a favorite person in a romantic sense, which was often the case and usually with men, but sometimes it's happened in friendships with women, or femmes as well, and sometimes it's happened with relatives. I think relatives for me trigger me the most just because of a lot of the trauma I had came from family. Anyway, let me catch my breath. So for me, I some other behaviors that I had that I still struggle with from time to time is what I say and boundaries. Whenever I have a favorite person, one thing that I've really struggled with is whenever someone rejects me, honoring that. And I have been the type of person that if someone blocked me, I found a way to reach out, whether it's someone else's phone or whatever. Like I found a way to reach out regardless. I didn't respect their boundaries because the intensity of my own emotions, I don't want to say they mattered more to me, but I feel like the impulsivity for me that comes with splitting, I'm not really in a cognitive state to think clearly or have clear judgment about my behaviors and to really honor the other person's boundary because I'm like in this emotional fog where it feels like life or death. And it's really hard to explain this because unless you're someone who's going through it, it just everything that we share as people with borderlines just sound dramatic to people who don't understand it and aren't feeling it. And so I'm trying to explain what's happening cognitively. And so please listen to this with an open mind. And if you are someone who has someone in your life with BPD or you've been on the other side of this, I know this can be really triggering and I just want you to understand what's going on inside the mindset. You have to remember this is an illness, not to say that these behaviors are okay, because they're not. They're not okay. And I have had behaviors that are very much abusive and harmful, and I acknowledge that. But to understand what's happening cognitively, I want to explain it from the perspective of a borderline, at least from my experience. From my experience, whenever I got into those states to where I wasn't honoring people's boundaries, I was reaching out or I was saying all of these things that were harmful in my mind, it felt to me like a life or death situation. The intensity of the emotions that I was feeling felt so overwhelmingly severe. It felt like I was in a crisis. It feels like I'm in a crisis whenever I'm triggered to split on people. And so then what would happen for me when I was attached to the person is like, I can't let this person get away. I can't let this person leave me. And for me, it's almost like I'm oscillating between younger parts of myself. And so my behaviors, they're not coming from a place of logic or reason. And I think that's why people who are close to people with BPD or in a relationship or who are on the receiving end of this, they don't understand because they're trying to reason and they're like, well, you just don't care because you're crossing my boundaries. Or you just don't care because like you're not thinking about how this makes me feel. And that is partially true. In those moments, it's not possible. It's literally not possible. You have to understand that empathy is a cognitive process. And so if this person is in crisis mode, they can't reason in that moment. So in the moment of splitting, to a certain extent, I do lack empathy in that moment because I'm in such crisis mode that all I can focus on is what in a sense is my survival. Again, all of this is an illusion. The reality is different than what's happening inside the mind of the borderline when they are triggered and splitting. And I feel like that's something that's so hard to get people to understand because mental illnesses are still so misunderstood and because people can't actually see and feel and experience what's happening unless they themselves have these illnesses, then they're only going to see the behaviors. And because they're only looking at the behaviors, they are going to judge you according to the behaviors. And so that's going to become what's perceived as a character flaw or what's perceived as you just being a terrible fucking person rather than understanding what's happening on like a psychological level, on a cognitive level. Splitting, for me anyway, you're very much disconnected from reality. You're disconnected from the reality of what's happening. And that's why oftentimes the behaviors that follow what's happening internally are not, or they feel so misaligned. It feels like way more extreme because what's actually happening inside the mind of the borderline who's splitting is that they feel extremely unsafe. And so that fight or flight response is kicked in. They're running on adrenaline, they're running on fear and pain and trauma. And I feel like a lot of what's happening in the situation with whatever triggered them is being jumbled with this wound, oftentimes rooted in past traumas. So for me personally, whenever I would get triggered and split on people and start lashing out, and I say crazy stuff when I'm lashing out and splitting, like terrible stuff, right? It feels like once I have come back to reality and I realize like I can only see things for what it is and think logically and like I'm in that more regulated state. So now I can see clearly what's happening and I'm not functioning from that fight or flight, response. When I think about everything that I said, I realized that it wasn't just me talking to the person per se, it was also me like pouring out all of the intensity of emotions that I've been carrying tied to pretty much all of the wounds that I had around abandonment and fear and trauma. So it's like because I struggle to process my emotions and to process these wounds, to process the emotions connected to these traumas and wounds, because I struggle to adequately like move it through the body and get it out, it comes out in this way. So when I'm splitting, it's like everything that I'm already carrying is coming out. And so for that person, it just seems like this is an overreaction, which from their perspective is true. But from the borderline's perspective, this isn't just a reaction to the perceived threat, because again, that person might be like, I'm not trying to hurt you, whatever. And or maybe they are, because sometimes we do attract and deal with people who are abusive as well. But say it's the case that you're dealing with someone who it was unintentional. They might be like, well, I wasn't trying to, so your response is not like, I don't understand it, because from their perspective, they're thinking level-headed and clear. And from an emotionally regulated state, they don't see what's actually they don't understand and see what's happening within. From your perspective as a borderline, or at least in my experience, it's like this is triggering something that's tied to a much larger issue than just this situation. And this person can't see that. So for me, um, splitting for me is very much connected to complex trauma. And so there are other things that are coming up. There are other times in my life where I felt abandoned or discarded or unsafe or abused or whatever. And maybe I'm consciously aware of it, maybe I'm not, regardless. All of that comes up when I'm splitting. So it doesn't matter if this person did something that in their mind they perceived as not a big deal, right? I'm sure if you have BPD, just hearing that is triggering to you. Because for you, what you're feeling and experiencing, it feels like life or death. And so the feeling, the sensation that comes with splitting is so overwhelming because you literally feel in that moment like you have to do something. And if you're someone who has more of like the quiet BPD, then you're internalizing all of these intense emotions. And sometimes that can that can then cause you to self-sabotage or self-harm even. It's a really painful thing to experience because then once you are out of the split and once you are able to see things clearly and you're not in that defense mechanism, you just feel this overwhelming sense of shame and guilt. And that's something that I've been struggling with a lot lately because I have been going through a separation this year and I made the terrible decision to try to date again. And a lot of these behaviors have been surfacing for me because I haven't actually fully processed those core wounds. And I think that one thing that I've been learning throughout this process is that it really takes so much more time than I feel like we give ourselves permission to take. Because everything feels rushed in our society and we really are looking for quick fixes. Like we want to, be able to take the pill. We want to be able to go to the therapy. We want to be able to do something to where we feel quote unquote normal, like as soon as possible. And of course, like no one wants to feel like shit. No one wants to suffer. So that makes sense. And I'm not judging anybody because I'm not patient and I'm the same way. But I'm really just learning just the nuances, the layers that come with actually like processing all of this stuff. And I just had to recently come to terms with it. I'm continuing to come to terms with the fact that I am not someone who's capable or of even dating and being in close relationships with men in particular at this time because of these behaviors, but also because the wounds that are causing me to split, that are causing me to lash out, that are causing these really unhealthy coping mechanisms that can be harmful to myself and to others. Um, the pain behind that, the trauma behind that, the wounds behind that, they aren't healed. And I am someone who believes healing is a lifelong journey. So I don't think that I'm gonna wait my whole life in order to get into a relationship with people. I feel like a lot of healing for people with BPD in particular can happen in relationship because that's where we are most triggered. And I'm someone who believes that once you have the support and you're out of crisis mode, of course, that you need to actually actively work on the triggers because they're connected to deeper wounding and deeper rooted issues that need to be and are asking to be resolved, which is why you're being triggered. I'm someone who believes you need to work on your triggers, not avoid them or numb them. Everyone feels differently about that. And so, whatever works for you, I always encourage you to do what works for you. If it works for you to just function and get through life, that's fine. But I'm someone who wants to live a fulfilled life. And so, it's not enough for me to just be able to work or function or take care of what I need to take care of. I want to be happy and fulfilled. So for me, it's important to actually actively address the triggers and the root causes of the triggers. But the process of that is difficult and takes a long time. And I've been very much struggling with that because for me, I realized that I was doing a lot of the processing mentally. And I think a lot of people do. I think that's where we start. I think that our recovery process, the traditional Western method anyway, is fully set up to focus on the mind and the behaviors, and thinking that those two things alone are enough to manage BPD. And again, I'm not someone who is trying to just manage BPD. I want to be whole. I want to feel fulfilled. And I definitely do believe that that is possible. But my personal belief is that it's deeper than just the mind and the behaviors. I think people with BPD have soul level wounds. And again, not everyone's spiritual, not everyone shares these belief systems, but this is how I feel. And I feel like I started to see the most rapid recovery and change once I started to introduce like more ancestral or decolonized methods of healing. Um, like for me, I realized last year, the year prior, that somatic work is imperative because our nervous systems are so dysregulated. And I think for me, splitting happens more when I'm in a dysregulated state in my body, like my physical body, because your body carries trauma, your body carries unprocessed emotions. For example, I'm someone who has had pain, chronic pain for the majority of my life. I have always had pain, even now. I'm in pain right now. I'm always in pain to the point to where I'm used to it because I always have pain here, like in my shoulders, and that's common for people who are like really traumatized or like have experienced a lot of emotional pain throughout their lives. Or if you struggle with BPD, you might not even notice it because a lot of us disassociate so much that there's a disconnection from the body. And I've been realizing as I've been working on splitting I need to reconnect with my body. I need to focus on the nervous system. I need to um, regulate my nervous system. I need to feel safe and present and be able to recognize what's happening physically because that is also connected to the emotional body. Um, and when you are regulated, when your nervous system is more regulated, it's actually easier to think clearly. Like it's all connective. You can't process cognitively in a healthy way if you are constantly in that state of fight or flight. And when you're in that state of fight or flight for so long, which so many people with BPD or bipolar or different mental health issues and complex trauma, and even those who are on the spectrum, many of us have dysregulated nervous systems. And so when you're in that heightened state for so long, your hormones get messed up and that can impact your moods even more. So like it's all connected. And that's why for me it's important to take a more holistic look at this and not just focus on the mind, right? For a while when I was in therapy, we were just talking about the issues and there was just to focus on the awareness of being aware of your thoughts, being aware of your behaviors. And it's not to say that's not important, it's really important. But awareness alone is not enough to change the behaviors. And I feel like that's what I've had to learn because I felt like I was failing at recovery for so long. And when I go back into these patterns, like I had literally split like this week. It happened this week. So when these things happen, I feel like fraud or a failure. And then I have to fight those negative thoughts and remind myself that healing is not linear. And, what can I do now? Hold myself accountable, obviously, and then really dig into what's actually needed. Like, what do I really need right now? And for me, I've really continued to struggle with abandonment wounds. Anytime I feel rejected, I become a monster. Like, there's no nice way to say it. My splitting is insane. And it's definitely improved. Again, I'm not causing like physical harm to anybody or to myself, but the things that I say and the boundaries that I'm willing to cross when I'm in that state really frustrate and scare me. And it to me, it's not a reflection of who I actually am. I know that it's just me acting out of pain and trauma, but of course, from the perspective of the people on the receiving end, they're going to associate that with my character and with who I am, even if I myself understand that it's not who I am, it's just me acting out of pain and trauma. And even if they are emotionally intelligent enough to understand that, it doesn't change the impact of the behaviors. It still hurts people, it's still shitty. So it's been really hard because that can then exacerbate the dysregulation because now I have all of this inner critique now, and now it's turning inward. All of the splitting is turning inward. So what happens for me is I'll split outwardly, and then once I come to, I'll have shame and guilt, and then it'll turn inward, and then that'll feel like a depressive episode, and then it's this vicious cycle of splitting, lashing out, um, and then turning all of that frustration inwards because I feel shame and guilt for the outcome. Right. And that cycle is something that has repeated in all of my relationships, particularly with men. And it's happened with family and relatives and jobs too, but more so I notice it in romantic relationships. That's when it's most severe. And so I really have had to accept, and I'm still accepting that like I have no choice but to really focus on regulating my nervous system so that I can be able to calm myself down enough to really process what it is that I need and the support that I need when I'm feeling that rejection, when I'm feeling that abandonment, because I feel like I still really struggle to put a pause between that feeling, those intense feelings, and the behaviors that follow. And a lot of like the traditional treatments focus on that. Like DBT, for example, is like one of the top recommended treatments for people with BPD, and I've done it twice. Um, and again, that awareness is great. Like I know all the acronyms, I know all the tools, but when you're in that moment and you're feeling those emotions and your nervous system is dysregulated, it's really hard to pause and reflect enough to think from the wise mind. I used to say I can't do it. I don't want to say you can't do it, but it feels impossible in those moments. It's not impossible, but it feels impossible. The way that I can explain it best, and I think the way that I've tried to explain it to providers in the past is like you're literally in a burning building and you feel like you're on fire, but then other people come in and they don't see the fire or feel the fire and they're just telling you to calm down because all they see is you freaking the fuck out because you think you're on fire. So you just look crazy. You look insane, but they don't understand that you're actually in pain because you are on fire, right? And that's what living with BPD is like. And so for me, like doing the traditional modalities, it literally feels like I'm trying to force myself to pretend I'm not on fire when I feel like I'm on fire. And just think about that. Like in reality, if you were on fire and someone came and told you to calm down, would you be able to calm down? No. Remember your tools. Stop, drop, and roll. Like you wouldn't be able to think clearly because you are in crisis. That's what it feels like when you're splitting. That's what it feels like. You're in crisis, right? And so it's so important to learn to regulate, to get regulated. And their support is needed to do that. I think a lot of like recovery has really focused on it from a really hyper individualistic standpoint, which I think there's a lot that you can discover when you are alone with yourself. And I think a big part of recovery as people with BPD who tend to be codependent, right, is learning to sit with yourself in that discomfort because it is uncomfortable for many of us to be alone. I personally have learned to like it a little bit more, but apart from just having that solitude and awareness comes the actual regulation, which is required for you to actually be able to get into a place where you can think clearly, and then your behaviors can reflect the fact that you are in a regulated state of mind. You can think clearly and you're seeing things from the reality and not from this distorted version of what you feel like you're experiencing, because you're functioning from fight or flight, you're functioning from crisis. And so that process of regulating the nervous system is so difficult. um, to backtrack, I realized how important this was when I started taking acupuncture, and so much was coming up for me because in those moments I was grounded in my body. And again, so many of us with BPD, we disassociate. So we don't feel grounded. And because we're so disconnected from our bodies, it's hard for us to actually know like what we're feeling physically. And I feel like this is important because as I have become more grounded in my body, which is something, again, really hard to do, I disassociate subconsciously. So then when I realize I'm doing it, I have to bring myself back, right? But what I have realized as I have been becoming more grounded is that I'm, for one, like I said, always in pain, tense here, tense in my neck. And the more that I've spoken to like somatic practitioners, the more they've been able to connect it to like, oh, if you have tightness in your hips, and that's usually connected to like sexual trauma, or you have like, a lot of tense, you know, tightness in your shoulders and neck, and that's usually connected to unprocessed emotions. And so there's a lot that we carry in our bodies. And so it's not enough to just understand it from the mind. It's not enough to just go to therapy and talk about it and have the awareness, but you need to, you also need to regulate. You need to release that. You need to release it from the physical body. You could be carrying pain from when you were a teenager and maybe you were bullied or maybe you felt unheard in your family or whatever. You could be carrying pain from then. And then when you start to spit on whoever this person is, that's your FP or whoever, that is coming up because it's still in your body. So you might not be consciously thinking about it. In your mind, you're just responding to whatever that situation is, and you're splitting because it triggered something in you, but you don't understand that that trigger is bringing up all of this pain from a plethora of experiences that you had prior that you're probably not even consciously thinking of, or you might not even remember. For me, there's like so much that's happened in my life that I don't remember. I am someone who has like blips of my childhood that I remember vividly and perfectly from such a young age, even super young age, um, to like just years of my life that I just like a blur. I literally can't, there's nothing. It's just black. It's really weird. Like it's very choppy. And I think a lot of people who have trauma can resonate with that. And so there are many things I don't remember. And in doing more like of the somatic practices, even as simple as like EFT tapping. If you can't afford to go to acupuncture, which right now I can't, so I get it. If you can afford to go like get a massage or do some of those like more expensive somatic practices, there are things you can do at home. For example, dancing, shaking your hips, you're releasing trauma. Shaking in general, a lot of people who are on the spectrum stem, that is very regulating for the nervous system to stem. You need to shake, you need to move, you need to fidget. I do it all the time. Shaking, and then like I've been really lately like getting more into qigong and like learning these different very simple moves that you can do to move energy throughout the body. So look that up. If you're on Red Note has a lot of really great tips for that. But even like YouTube, TikTok, like there's so much you can do at home. I've been like really practicing like the EFT tapping, which I would recommend. And there are like just there's so many different forms of somatic healing. I'm also someone who will put like sound healing or sound baths on even if I'm at home, like even in depressive episodes when I isolate and struggle to leave my home, like I'll intentionally put on sound baths on my TV on YouTube. There's like so many free resources if you have access to internet, of course. If you're listening to this, then you probably do. So make use of that. Like look up somatic practices you can do at home. Look up yoga, look up shaking, dance, tapping. It doesn't have to be like this whole big expensive thing, but just finding a way to like move these emotions out will help slowly but surely get you into a more regulated state so that when you are triggered, you can actually put a pause between those intense emotions and feelings that come up with that and the behaviors that then follow. Because you can be splitting and not necessarily have behaviors that are harmful to yourself or others. You can still struggle with splitting and learn how to manage the behaviors by regulating yourself. It takes time. And I feel like it's harder because again, like the emotions behind splitting are so intense. And then when you couple that with the fact that once you are kind of out of that splitting state, that you feel so much shame and guilt, it worsens everything because now you're feeling like it's fueling the fire, in my opinion, because you're feeling more negative emotions. And what happens then is you turn all of that inwards. And if you are already so overwhelmed to the point to where you split in the first place, right? Then having these intense negative emotions about what you did to follow, not to say you shouldn't hold yourself accountable, but again, like I think in the way that someone with BPD does it, to where it becomes so self-loathing to trigger warning, like you don't want to be on this planet anymore. I want people who are listening who don't have BPD to know how extreme this is. I'm not saying you shouldn't care. You should care, but the way that we feel oftentimes after a split is literally like the worst person in the world, and like we don't want to be here because we don't want to cause harm or burden people because our true selves actually don't want to cause harm. But the part of us that's triggered and functioning from pain and trauma is doing so because there's a perceived threat. Every time there is a perceived fear of abandonment, or again, like we're living in this distorted reaction and this distorted reality based on trauma, based on pain. So everything that follows is just defense mechanisms. And in my opinion, as someone with BPD, it's not helpful to have those intense negative emotions that follow splitting turn inwards, because then that can lead to harmful behaviors to yourself, you self-sabotaging, neglecting, and potentially harming yourself. And we don't want that either, right? And so there needs to be something to support regulating you so that you can pause in between those feelings and then actually have the support needed to work through those feelings rather than go straight into the harmful behaviors, whether that's harmful externally to others or harmful internally to yourself. And that is hard. Like it's extremely hard to do, but again, like I've kind of listed some of the somatic things that I do. It's just learning to implement these things in those moments. And right now, I'm being realistic in the fact that I have to take a step back from trying to have really close relationships to like potential romantic partners, even if it's something I really want. I have to take a step back from it because I'm not a safe person to be in connection with at this time. It's not safe for me or the other person because I don't feel safe enough in my body. I don't feel safe enough in connection to others. And so then I have to go back and figure out what is it that I need to feel safe. And on a deep, deep core level, I've realized that I have to go back into my inner child, my inner teenager. And people talk about that a lot, but I feel like we don't really get into the nitty gritty of what that looks like. So for me, I've been doing a lot more meditation, and I fall off this. Like I'm not consistent. I struggle with consistency. I also have ADHD, so I struggle with consistency. And one thing that I've been really trying to do is be really intentional about meditating every day, because the days that I do like deep meditative practices, and especially like if I do guided meditations that are specifically focused on connecting with and talking to your inner child or your younger self, um, that's really healing for me because I have realized that I am abandoning myself in a sense. And I think that when people talk about abandoning yourself, it's confusing, and not everyone understands it because I think we focus on external and what the external behaviors are. So, say you are someone who maybe you are doing pretty decent with your self care and your habits and going to therapy, but your behaviors and these intense feelings and mood swings and the splitting isn't stopping. And then you feel like a failure, like you're doing something wrong, but really, it's just the core wounds and the core issues aren't really adequately being addressed. And that's just the truth. And this is not to say that you're doing something wrong. It's just that it's very difficult to get to those core wounds and tend to them. And it takes a lot of time. And so for me, anytime I was splitting and this trigger was coming up, I wasn't actively addressing what was causing this pain, what was causing me to go into the state of feeling so threatened and unsafe, or I haven't really been allowing myself, I realize, to fully address this fear and where it's coming from. Like I know in my mind, but I haven't been like actively addressing it. And because I didn't really know how, people don't talk about how in specific detail. Like I need a step-by-step tutorial. Right. So here's what I've been doing. And again, this is just what's been working for me. One, I incorporate ancestral practices. So for me, connecting with my ancestors, which I do through prayer and meditation and rituals, is important. If I'm not doing that, if I'm being stubborn and I'm not listening to the part of me that's telling me to pray, to talk to my ancestors, to connect in that way, I get dysregulated a lot easier. So that's important to me personally because that's something that helps me. You might have your own practices or beliefs or whatever. Lean on that. If you're someone who has that, lean on that. Um, Next is the nervous system regulation, which for me means getting my circadian rhythm in check, which is really hard to do. And I notice that I'm the most dysregulated and the most prone to splitting when I'm not getting quality sleep. I think I'm going to do an entire episode on the importance of sleep because I really feel like our society does not stress this enough. Like it sounds simple, it's not. And it's not even just enough to get sleep, it's like the quality of the sleep you're getting. Because whenever I do sleep lately, and this is how you know your nervous system is really dysregulated, is that it's uninterrupted. So I mean, it's interrupted, meaning you're waking up a lot. Maybe you wake up at 3 a.m. all the time, right? Witching hour. Um, or you're having really bad dreams, or you just wake up and you still feel exhausted. Like you're not really getting a quality restorative night's sleep. And so that's something that I'm really trying to get back into and I'm being intentional about by like trying to shift up my night routine, which lately I've been really slacking on. And like drinking teas and taking supplements like magnesium and literally all the things because I cannot be in a regulated state if I am not rested. So that's like a non-negotiable for me now. And then food and diet for sure. If I'm eating crap, I'm going to feel like crap. And as I get older, this has become more apparent and it's frustrating because I'm not someone who grew up eating super healthy. I was raised in the South, I was raised poor, so I was not I survived on fast food and soul food. And it's been really hard since living in California, but I've lived here for almost a decade now, so I feel like I've gotten way better at it. But it's still hard sometimes, and I've struggled and I continue to struggle with nourishing my body. But when I do, when I'm very intentional about what I eat, it makes a huge difference. And again, these things sound simple and it's frustrating and irritating to hear. I promise you, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. It really does. Um, and then again, like the somatics. So the days that I am a couch potato, and we'll have days like that. It's just part of it. It's hard. It's hard. There are days I don't want to get out of bed. There are days I don't want to get off the couch, and there are days I don't want to leave the house. So on those days, which I've had several recently, I try to get sunlight the best way I can. Luckily, I live in a place that has a lot of natural light, so I can like open a window and just like look up at the sun for a little bit. Like even if it's just 5 minutes a day, I just like am by a window by the sun, and I don't want to leave my house that day. That's fine because at least I'm getting sunlight. Like I have the window or the door open and I'm getting sunlight, right? If you're lucky enough to have a yard, then go sit in the yard, touch grass, right? Um, Going outside for sure is like a non-negotiable. If I'm ever frustrated or sad or dysregulated and I stay inside for days on end or weeks on end, sometimes it worsens every time. Like for me, if I can get outside into nature, that helps. I live in a city where people drive like crazy people, so it's really stressful for me sometimes. So there are days when I'm like, I cannot drive today. And so again, I find ways to connect from the comfort of my home, whether that be taking a bath or a shower, standing by the window and staring at the sun, but something. Or I do movement indoors if I'm not going outside for a walk. Then I do like dancing. I love to dance. So I'll just dance. I'll put some music on and I'll dance for, some days I don't have energy. And so I can't do past like one or two songs. Other days I could dance for like 30 minutes, an hour, even 2 hours. So whatever feels good to you, right? But like some type of movement, even if it's just stretching, even if it's just shaking, like those little things, it's not going to make like the biggest difference in an instance, but over time, it definitely helps. So those are just like some of the things I do. I definitely want to do like a full episode on like all of the nervous regulation tools and techniques and things that I'm trying and have tried and has worked and hasn't worked for me personally. But I just want to share that like splitting is more than just you being triggered and lashing out. Like there's so much more that goes into it. And I just want to empower you to know that it's not all on you. And even holding yourself accountable is important. Saying sorry when you need to, acknowledging the harm you might have caused yourself or to others is important. You don't have to do that from a self-depreciating point of view. You don't have to do that from a self-loathing point of view. You have to understand, as you are someone who is healing from intense pain and a very extreme mental illness, these things are going to happen and it's really hard and you need to regulate. You need support. You deserve it. You deserve support and you deserve love. And even if you have caused pain, and even if you have made mistakes and caused harm, that doesn't mean that you're any less deserving of love. And I don't know who needs to hear that, but someone needs to hear that. I know I need to hear that. You still deserve love. You still deserve to feel safe. And it's not all on you. This is extremely hard to heal from. Your nervous system is really unregulated. You need to feel safe. You need to learn to feel safe in your body. You need to learn how to feel safe in connection to others. You need to learn to trust that people care about you because we know that people with BPD, we find it difficult to have emotional permanence. And so all of these things take time because you didn't just develop this illness in a day, right? So it's going to take time to heal, to regulate your nervous system, to get into balance and to, minimize these splitting behaviors. And so I'm going to wrap it up there. I really do hope this provides some type of insight for those of you who are maybe close to someone with BPD, but also I hope this is empowering in some way to those of you who might be struggling because splitting is really a painful thing to go through on a regular basis. Um, but again, it's just so much deeper than just being triggered. Like there's so much to it, and I really hope that those of you who are listening really look into somatic practices and nervous system regulation and incorporate that into whatever healing that you're doing, whether that's therapy, whether that's DBT, whatever you're doing right now. Um, and I really hope that it helps. And I do believe that with time these things can go away. I do think it's hard to heal these core wounds. And because like of our behaviors, we can be isolated and not have the support we need, but there are people out there who understand and want to support. I have some resources and organizations and things linked in my show notes all the time, so please go check it out. And if this is helpful to you, then I encourage you to subscribe and follow my content for more. Also, I have the conversation series still going, and I am looking for more people who are willing to come on. I've heard from people I feel like on the healing side, but I'd really like more people who are open and vulnerable and willing to share their lived experience dealing with severe mental health issues. So if that's something any of you want to do, I know it can be nerve-wracking if you're afraid of public speaking, um, but it really feels like you're just talking to yourself, to be honest. So if it's something any of you are interested in, then please follow me online and reach out to me, send me a DM, send me an email. I'm gonna leave it there. But I really hope that all of you take care. This is a rough season. This has been a difficult year. You are not alone. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Bye.